Look, I've witnessed a lot of stupidity in my 700 cycles as a galactic observer, seriously. You wouldn't believe the idiotic things species do when they think nobody's watching. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened on Station Veridax 9 that day. Let me set the scene for you. The station was your typical deep space trading hub, floating in the outer reach territories, where 3 different jurisdictions meet and consequently where absolutely nobody gives a damn about what happens, because they're all too busy arguing about who's supposed to care. Brilliant system, really. Anyway, the place was crawling with every species you could think of. Krell traders with their forearms juggling datapads, Xenthi merchants hissing over spice prices, even a few Dralnik's enforcers pretending they were keeping the peace while mostly just collecting bribes. And then there was Isla Reeves, human, junior xenobiologist. 26 cycles old, which in human years is apparently still considered young enough to make catastrophically bad decisions, but old enough to be allowed to make them unsupervised. She'd been assigned to Veridax 9 for exactly 3 standard months, studying the microbial ecosystems in the station's hydroponics bay, riveting stuff. Truly, and generally staying out of trouble, until she didn't. The trouble started in Sector 7, the market district, where Isla had gone to pick up some supplies. Now, she was walking past one of those shady tech stalls, you know, the kind selling refurbished equipment that's definitely stolen and probably won't explode more than twice, when she heard it. A Krell merchant, big guy named Thexus, was screaming at someone in that particular pitch. That means things are about to get violent. Isla, being human and therefore genetically incapable of minding her own business, stopped to look. The someone being screamed at was a Lyth'ean child. And, oh, this is where it gets interesting. Because Lyth'eans are, how do I put this delicately? They're the bottom of the galactic social ladder. Smaller than most species, with these delicate translucent features and bioluminescent markings that pulse with their emotions, which makes lying absolutely impossible for them, by the way. Terrible evolutionary adaptation in a galaxy full of liars, and they're basically treated like vermin by most of the so-called civilized species. This particular Lyth'ean couldn't have been more than 8 cycles old, had apparently been caught trying to steal a nutrition pack. The kid was trembling, her markings flashing rapid purple and white, which in Lyth'ean means pure terror, while Thexus loomed over her with all 4 arms raised, fully prepared to teach her a lesson about respecting other people's property. A crowd had gathered because of course they had, and not a single being stepped forward to intervene. Why would they? It was just a Lyth'ean street rat, probably orphaned. Definitely unwanted. Standard procedure was to let the merchant handle it. Maybe call station security if things got too messy. Move on with your day. Isla Reeves, human extraordinaire, looked at that terrified child and did something that still baffles me to this day. She walked right up to Thexus, this massive Krell who could have torn her apart with one arm, and said, "Hey, how much for the nutrition pack?" Thexus stopped mid-threat, all 4 eyes swiveling to focus on this tiny human who'd just interrupted his righteous fury. "What?" he growled, because apparently even his translator was confused. "The nutrition pack," Isla repeated calmly, gesturing to the stolen item clutched in the Lyth'ean's small hands. "How much does it cost? I'll buy it." Now, here's where a smart being would have backed off. Recognized that Thexus wasn't interested in money anymore. This was about principle, about making an example, about maintaining order. But Isla just stood there, waiting for an answer like she'd asked the most reasonable question in the galaxy. Thexus's mandibles clicked together in what I've learned to recognize as Krell laughter, though there wasn't much humor in it. "This isn't about credits, human. This little parasite needs to learn." 15 credits, Isla interrupted, pulling out her datapad. "That's the listed price for a standard nutrition pack at your stall. I'm transferring it now." The crowd had gone quiet. Even the background noise of the market seemed to fade as everyone watched this absolutely insane interaction. The Lyth'ean child had stopped trembling, her markings shifting to confused orange as she stared up at the human. Thexus looked like he wanted to argue, but here's the thing about Krell, They're greedy, and they're also weirdly bound by their own merchant codes. If someone offers to pay for stolen goods at list price, technically the transaction becomes legitimate. It's a loophole that almost never gets used because who's stupid enough to pay for something that's already been stolen? Humans, apparently. Humans are that stupid. Fine, Thexus spat, snatching the credits from Isla's transfer. But she's banned from my stall, permanently. Isla nodded, then turned to the Lyth'ean child and knelt down, which is significant because humans are one of the few species that voluntarily make themselves vulnerable like that. Getting down on the ground where anything could strike them, and she smiled. "It's okay," she said softly. "You can keep it." The child's markings exploded into a rainbow of colors, cycling through confusion, disbelief, gratitude, and fear so rapidly it was like watching an emotional seizure. She clutched the nutrition pack to her chest and bolted, disappearing into the crowd before anyone could stop her. The market returned to its usual chaos. Merchants hawking their wares, customers haggling, the whole dance of commerce resuming like nothing had happened. But something had happened. I'd watched it, recorded it, filed it away in my observation logs with a note that basically said, "Human displays typical irrational compassion, wastes credits on worthless being, no strategic benefit identified." Standard human behavior, right? Annoying but harmless. I was so wrong. 3 days passed. Isla went about her normal routine, work in the hydroponics bay, meals in the station cafeteria, sleep in her cramped quarters in the residential sector. I monitored her because that's my job, and also because humans are endlessly fascinating in their ability to stumble into situations that would kill most other species. Then came day 4. Isla was working late in the hydroponics bay, running some analysis on fungal samples, again absolutely thrilling stuff, when the station's emergency alert system started blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the corridors, and the automated voice announced what everyone in the outer reach territories dreads hearing. Hull breach detected. Sector 7 compromised. All personnel evacuate to designated safe zones immediately. Hull breaches are bad, like catastrophically bad. In the vacuum of space, you've got maybe 90 seconds before the structural integrity of an entire section fails. And when that happens, everything and everyone in that section gets sucked out into the void. The station's emergency protocols are designed to seal off compromised areas, contain the damage, save as many lives as possible, which means they lock the blast doors. Which means anyone still in the affected sector gets sacrificed for the greater good. Cold mathematics. Practical. Logical. Isla dropped her samples and ran toward Sector 7. Not away from it, toward it. Because of course she did. The corridors were packed with beings fleeing in the opposite direction, a stampede of panic as species of every size and shape fought to reach the safe zones. Isla pushed against the tide, getting knocked around, stepped on, nearly trampled by a group of Drolniks who didn't even notice her. She kept moving forward, and I'm watching this through the station's security feeds, thinking, what is this idiot doing? She reached the edge of Sector 7, just as the warning klaxons shifted to a different tone, the 60-second countdown before the blast doors sealed. The sector was already mostly evacuated, stragglers sprinting past her toward safety, and the pressure alerts were going critical. You could see it in the way the air shimmered, could hear the groaning of metal, as the station's structure strained against the breach. Isla looked into that sector, looked at the market stalls being torn apart by escaping atmosphere, at the debris swirling in increasingly violent vortexes, and she saw something. Someone. A small figure huddled behind an overturned cargo container, too terrified to move, markings flashing desperate white against translucent skin. The Lyth'ean child. The same one from 3 days ago. Most beings would have made a calculation at that moment. One Lyth'ean orphan versus their own life. Not even close. The blast doors were closing in 50 seconds. Maybe less. The math didn't work. The risk wasn't justified. Isla Reeves looked at that child and ran straight into Sector 7. I'm not exaggerating when I say I actually yelled at my monitoring screen. "No, you absolute moron," as if she could hear me. as if she would have listened anyway. The security feeds showed her fighting against the pressure differential, using debris as handholds, pulling herself forward meter by agonizing meter, while the countdown continued its inexorable march towards 0. 40 seconds. The child saw Isla coming and her markings shifted to bright yellow, hope mixed with terror, but she still couldn't move, frozen by fear or injury. I couldn't tell which. 30 seconds. Isla reached the cargo container, grabbed the child, hoisted her up with strength that surprised me because humans look so fragile, but they've got this ridiculous muscle density that lets them pull off stunts like this. 20 seconds. She turned to run back and we all realized at the same moment that she'd gone too deep. The exit was too far. The pressure was too strong. The math had stopped working in her favor the second she'd entered the sector. The child realized it too. Her markings went pure white, that terror response, and she looked up at Isla with these huge eyes that seemed to ask, "Why did you come if we're both going to die?" 10 seconds. The blast doors were already sliding closed, massive slabs of reinforced alloy designed to seal away disaster, and there was no way, absolutely no physical way, for a human to cover that distance in time while carrying a child. Isla looked at those closing doors, looked down at the Lyth'eria in her arms, and she smiled, actually smiled like she'd just figured out the punchline to a joke nobody else understood. 5 seconds. She dropped to her knees, pressed the child against her chest, and curled her body around the small form like a shield. The Lyth'eria's markings cycled through every color in rapid succession, confusion and fear, and something else I couldn't quite identify. 3 seconds. Isla bent her head down, whispered something to the child that the sensors couldn't pick up over the screaming wind and alarms. 2 seconds. She closed her eyes. 1 second. The child closed hers too, expecting death, expecting the blast doors to seal and the air to finish rushing out and the cold void to claim them both. 0. The blast doors slammed shut with a sound like thunder, and the emergency bulkheads activated. The human did something unthinkable. She didn't die. Neither of them died. Which I'm still trying to process, because according to every calculation, every probability matrix, every single logical outcome analysis I ran, they should have been corpses. Frozen, decompressed corpses floating in a sealed-off sector waiting for a recovery team to eventually bag them up. But when the blast doors sealed and the emergency lights flickered on in Sector 7, there was Isla Reeves still curled around that Lyth'eria child, both of them very much alive and breathing hard in the thin atmosphere that remained. Here's what happened, and I only know this because I went back and analyzed the footage about 50 times trying to make sense of it. In those final 3 seconds before the doors closed, Isla had spotted an emergency environmental bubble, one of those last resort survival pods built into the station's infrastructure that almost never get used because who has time to activate them during an actual emergency? And she'd managed to position herself and the child directly beneath it while simultaneously slapping the manual release with her free hand. The bubble had deployed in 1.2 seconds, creating a temporary atmospheric seal around them, just as the blast doors completed their closure. It wasn't designed for long-term survival, maybe 20 minutes of breathable air for 2 beings, less if one of them was panicking and hyperventilating, which the Lyth'eria child definitely was, but it was enough. Enough to not die immediately. Anyway, I watched through the internal sector feeds as Isla slowly uncurled, checking herself for injuries, then checking the child with methodical efficiency. The Lyth'eria's markings were cycling through colors so fast they were almost strobing, and she was making these high-pitched sounds that the translators struggled to interpret, but which I'm pretty sure meant something along the lines of, "What just happened? Why aren't we dead? How are you real?" Isla laughed. Actually laughed. This slightly hysterical sound that echoed weirdly in the confined space of the environmental bubble. And she said, "We're okay. We're okay. Just breathe." Slow breaths. The child tried, failed, tried again. Her markings gradually settled into a steady blue-green pulse that indicated a disconnect between relief and shock. Outside the bubble, Sector 7 was a disaster. The hull breach had been contained, but the damage was extensive. Market stalls destroyed, structural supports bent at concerning angles, small fires burning in pockets where oxygen remained. The station's automated systems were already dispatching repair drones, and I could hear the security chief screaming orders over the communication channels, organizing rescue teams and damage assessment crews. Nobody knew Isla and the child were alive. The blast doors had sealed, the sector was considered lost, and protocol dictated that they wait at least 6 hours before attempting re-entry to ensure all atmospheric instability had resolved. 6 hours. The environmental bubble had maybe 20 minutes of air left, and that was being generous. Isla pulled out her datapad because, of course, humans carry their technology into life-threatening situations, and tried to send a distress signal. Nothing. The blast doors were designed to block all communications to prevent electromagnetic interference from spreading to other sectors. She tried rerouting through the station's emergency network. Still nothing. The damage from the breach had knocked out half the local systems. The Lythian child watched her with those huge eyes, markings shifting to worried orange, and Isla could see the question forming. Are we going to die now, after all that? No, Isla said firmly, like she was making a promise to the universe itself. No, we're not. She started examining the environmental bubble's control panel, running her fingers over the interface with the kind of focus I'd only seen from humans when they're either solving impossible problems or about to do something monumentally stupid. Usually both. The thing about environmental bubbles is they're designed as stopgap measures, temporary shelters while you wait for rescue. They're not meant to be modified or hacked or turned into anything other than what they are. The manufacturers specifically designed them to be tamper-proof to prevent idiots from breaking them during emergencies. Isla Reeves looked at that tamper-proof panel and apparently decided that was more of a suggestion than a rule. She pulled out a small toolkit from her belt. Xenobiologists carry the weirdest things and started dismantling the access panel while the child watched with increasing alarm, her markings flashing red. Danger. Danger. What are you doing? The bubble's air recycler is running at minimum efficiency, Isla explained, talking more to herself than the child, her hands moving with practiced precision. If I can reroute power from the structural integrity field, which we don't technically need since we're already protected by the blast doors, I can boost the recycler output and maybe buy us another hour. 2 if we're lucky. The child's markings shifted to confused purple. She didn't understand the technical details, but she understood the tone. This human was trying to save them. Again, Isla's fingers flew over the exposed circuits, rewiring connections, redirecting power flows, doing things to that environmental bubble that would have made the engineers who designed it weep. Sparks flew. Warning lights blinked. The bubble's automated voice started protesting unauthorized modifications detected. Please cease tampering with safety systems. Oh, shut up, Isla muttered, shorting out the warning system with a casual flick of her wrist. And then, impossibly beautifully, the air recycler hummed to life with increased vigor, pulling in the bubble's stale atmosphere and processing it with newfound efficiency. The display showed oxygen levels stabilizing, then slowly climbing. The Lythian child's markings exploded into brilliant gold. Pure amazement, and she made a sound that the translators interpreted as laughter, though it was higher and more musical than any human laugh. Isla grinned at her. See? Not dead yet. But they were still trapped in a sealed sector with no way to communicate, no way to signal for help, and no guarantee that anyone would think to check for survivors in a supposedly evacuated zone. Isla sat back against the bubble's membrane, datapad in her lap, thinking. The child shifted closer to her, tentative, her small hand reaching out to touch Isla's sleeve. The human looked down at her and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding, or just the simple acknowledgement that they were in this together. What's your name? Isla asked softly. The child's markings pulsed with soft purple uncertainty, and she made a sound that was all clicks and harmonic tones, nothing that human vocal cords could reproduce. The translator struggled, spitting out a phonetic approximation. Lyth'eria. Lyth'eria, Isla repeated, getting it wrong but trying anyway. I'm Isla. Nice to officially meet you. Lyth'eria's marking shifted to warm orange affection, and she settled against Isla's side like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like this human stranger hadn't just risked everything to save her life. Like maybe she'd been waiting her whole short existence for someone to prove that not all beings in the galaxy were cruel. They sat like that for maybe 10 minutes, the bubble humming around them, the destroyed sector silent beyond their protective membrane. Then, Isla's expression changed, went distant, and I recognized that look from my observations. That's a human having an idea, usually a terrible one. She stood up abruptly, nearly hitting her head on the bubble's curved surface, and started examining the sector through the semi-transparent membrane. Her eyes locked onto something in the distance. I had to zoom in on the feeds to see what she was looking at, and when I identified it, I actually felt something like respect, which is not an emotion I experience often toward anyone, let alone humans. She was looking at the station's emergency access conduits, the maintenance tunnels that run through every sector, designed for repair drones and emergency personnel. They were pressurized independently, sealed off from the main sectors, and most importantly, they had their own communication networks that bypassed the blast doors. The nearest access hatch was approximately 30 meters away from their bubble. 30 meters of depressurized, structurally unstable sector, filled with debris and small fires, and who knows what other hazards. Isla pulled up the environmental bubble specifications on her datapad, scrolling through technical readouts that would have bored most beings to tears. She was looking for something specific, and when she found it, she smiled that smile again, that same expression she'd worn right before running into certain death. "Okay," she said, turning to Lyth'eria. "I need you to trust me one more time." The child's markings flashed confused orange, but she nodded, because what else was she going to do? This human had saved her life twice already. Why stop trusting her now? Isla started reprogramming the environmental bubble, her fingers dancing across the control panel with increasing urgency. What she was doing was technically impossible. The bubbles weren't designed to be mobile. They were anchored to specific locations. But humans have this beautiful, terrifying habit of ignoring what's technically impossible when they've decided something needs to happen. She rerouted all remaining power from every non-essential system, life support monitoring, structure alerts, even the display panels, and fed it directly into the bubble's emergency propulsion system, which I didn't even know existed until that moment, because it's meant for micro-adjustments during deployment, not for actual movement. The bubble shuddered, started to shift, and then, with agonizing slowness, it began moving across the damaged sector floor like some kind of absurd transparent vehicle, carrying Isla and Lyth'eria toward that distant access hatch. It was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen. The bubble wasn't designed for this, kept threatening to collapse, made horrible grinding sounds as it scraped across debris, but it moved. Meter by meter, it moved. Lyth'eria clung to Isla, markings cycling between fear and excitement and disbelief. Isla kept one hand on the controls, the other wrapped protectively around the child, her eyes fixed on that access hatch like it was the only thing in the universe that mattered. They made it 15 meters, 20, 25. The bubble's integrity warnings were screaming. The structure was failing. They had maybe 30 seconds before the whole thing collapsed and exposed them to vacuum. Isla pushed the propulsion to maximum, burning through the last reserves of power in one desperate surge. The bubble lurched forward, covering the final distance in a burst of speed that probably violated every safety regulation ever written. 29 meters. She cut the propulsion and manually triggered the access hatch while they were still moving, using an emergency override code that she absolutely shouldn't have known, but humans are ridiculously good at obtaining information they're not supposed to have. The hatch slid open. The bubble collided with the access tunnel entrance, and in the 3 seconds before the environmental bubble finally gave up and collapsed completely, Isla grabbed Lyth'eria, kicked off against the bubble's membrane, and launched them both through the hatch opening like a human-shaped missile. They tumbled into the access tunnel in a tangle of limbs, the hatch slamming shut behind them automatically, selling them into the pressurized maintenance corridor. Real atmosphere rushed into Isla's lungs as she gasped, coughed, rolled onto her back. Lyth'eria landed on top of her, markings flashing every color simultaneously in what I can only describe as chromatic screaming. And then they were both laughing. The child making those musical sounds, and Isla making those breathy human noises. And neither of them could stop. They'd made it. Against probability, against logic, against every reasonable expectation, they'd made it. Isla found an emergency comm panel in the tunnel and activated it, her voice hoarse but steady. "This is Junior Xenobiologist Isla Reeves to Station Command. I'm in Access Conduit 7 Alpha with a Lythean civilian. We're both alive. Repeat, we're both alive." The response came after a moment of stunned silence. The security chief's voice crackling through. "Reeves, how in the 17 hells are you alive?" "The sector's sealed," we thought. We all thought. "Long story," Isla interrupted, looking down at Lyth'eria, who was still clinging to her, markings now a steady warm gold. "We're going to need medical evaluation, and probably some therapy. Also, I might have destroyed an environmental bubble. Sorry about that." They sent a rescue team, of course. Pulled Isla and Lyth'eria out of the access tunnel, rushed them to medical, ran every scan and test imaginable. Both of them were fine, bruised, exhausted, slightly oxygen deprived, but fine. The station administrator wanted to discipline Isla for violating evacuation protocols. The security chief wanted to give her a commendation for creative problem solving. The medical staff wanted to study her because apparently surviving what she'd survived wasn't medically possible according to their models. Isla wanted none of it. She just wanted to make sure Lyth'eria was placed somewhere safe, somewhere the child wouldn't have to steal nutrition packs to survive. And this is the part that still gets me, that still makes me question everything I thought I understood about how the galaxy works. Within 2 days of the incident, 17 different beings had come forward offering to sponsor Lyth'eria. 17 species that normally wouldn't give a Lythang orphan a second glance were suddenly falling over themselves to provide housing, education, support, because they'd seen the security footage. Everyone had seen it. The human running into disaster to save a child that wasn't her species, wasn't her responsibility, wasn't even considered valuable by galactic standards. The human choosing to close her eyes and accept death rather than abandon someone small and scared. It spread across the station like fire, that footage, then across the system. Then further, because humans can never keep anything to themselves. And apparently neither can anyone else when the story is compelling enough. I'm a galactic observer. I'm supposed to remain neutral, document events without judgment, file my reports, and move on to the next assignment. But I filed a special notation in Isla Reeves' record, flagged it for priority attention, made sure every being who accessed humanity's file would see it. The notation read, "Species demonstrates irrational self-sacrifice for unrelated beings with no strategic benefit. Recommend continued observation. Humanity remains dangerously unpredictable and inexplicably compassionate. Threat assessment, unclear. Potential, unprecedented." Lyth'eria chose to stay with the Xenthi family, by the way. Good people ran a small restaurant in Sector 4. They let her help in the kitchen, taught her to cook, treated her like she mattered, and every week, without fail, Isla would visit. They'd share a meal, talk about nothing important, and Lyth'eria's markings would glow that warm gold color the entire time. I asked Isla once, in a moment of unprofessional curiosity, why she'd done it. Why she'd risked everything for a child she barely knew. She looked at me like I'd asked why water was wet. "Because she needed help," she said, like it was the simplest thing in the galaxy. Because nobody else was going to. Because she was scared and alone, and that's not okay, regardless of species. That's humans for you. They'll close their eyes expecting death and somehow come out the other side having rewritten the rules about what's possible. They'll look at the universe's cruel mathematics and decide the numbers don't matter as much as doing what's right. Absolutely unthinkable, completely impossible, entirely, frustratingly, beautifully human, and I wouldn't have it any other way.